Hi, my name is Frank Schroeder, and this is your Supply Chain Spotlight on what is new in Incoterms 2020. The Incoterms 2020 version is out and ready to be used in your future sales contracts. This new version of the long-established and globally used Incoterms is not a major reboot to the previous versions, but instead it's a user-friendly upgrade with great new features and changes that are focused specifically on helping the seller and the buyer to select the right Incoterms rule for their sales contract. It all starts with the introduction section, which provides an overview of what the Incoterms 2020 rules are and what they are not. It explains the basic roles and responsibilities of the seller and the buyer, as well as where the rules fit in among domestic and international contracts. It helps with the choice of the most appropriate Incoterms rule and details the differences between the 2010 and the 2020 versions of the Incoterms. This introduction section is a must-read for all users because it explains the general purpose and use of the Incoterms with easy-to-understand language and a thorough explanation of the topics it covers. The main difference compared to the 2010 introduction is that the author takes the time to explain important general information in detail, rather than just providing a basic summary. The ICC changed the internal order and content of the 10 articles within each Incoterms rule. The new articles are A1 and B1, General Obligations, A2 and B2, Delivery and Taking Delivery, A3 and B3, Transfer of Risks, A4 and B4, Carriage, A5 and B5, Insurance, A6 and B6, Delivery and Transport Document, A7 and B7, Export and Import Clearance, A8 and B8, Checking, Packaging, Marking, A9 and B9, Allocation of Cost, and A10 and B10, Notices. The 2020 version adds a completely new section within the book, which displays all the rules horizontally sorted below each of the articles, allowing for a quick comparison of the same article among different rules. The guidance notes at the beginning of each Incoterm rule are now explanatory notes. These explanatory notes provide more detail and better visualization of the rule that follows. The explanatory notes contain valuable information about delivery and risk, mode of transport, customs clearance, and various other important topics relative to that particular rule. The FCA rule was changed in regards to onboard bill of ladings. The FCA rule now addresses a situation where the seller needs a set of original onboard bill of ladings in order to satisfy an obligation to tender these documents to a bank under a letter of credit. A great new feature is the listing of all cost obligations within one article. All costs allocated to the seller or the buyer for each Incoterm rule are now combined in Article 9, rather than only being a side note listed in various articles for each rule. This provides a comprehensive list of all costs, which is less likely to be overlooked by the seller or the buyer. Another change is the level of insurance coverage for the CIP rule. The seller must now obtain an all-risk insurance cover on CIP shipments, which complies with the coverage under Institute Cargo Clause A, the international standard for what is considered to be all-risk coverage. While CIP now requires all-risk coverage, CIF remains as before, requiring only a basic or minimal coverage that complies with the Institute Cargo Clause C. Now, the seller and the buyer may agree to change the insurance cover to their preferred level, but need to make sure to specifically identify any variances to the Incoterms rule in their sales contract. The 2020 terms consider that the seller or the buyer may want to use their own means of transport where possible. The Incoterms 2010 were written with the assumption that transports would always be conducted by a third-party carrier. The 2020 version was updated specifically to include the possibility of transports being conducted by the seller or the buyer using their own means of transportation. The rule DAT, delivered at terminal, turned into DPU, delivered at place, unloaded. Now, the rule itself didn't change, but the word terminal in DAT had caused some unnecessary confusion to users on whether or not the delivery point had to be an actual terminal in a port or cargo facility, even though the 2010 rules did define the word terminal as any place, whether covered or not. Therefore, changing the DAT to DPU defines the delivery point as any place, while also identifying that the cargo needs to be unloaded by the seller. Last but not least, the ICC added security-related requirements to each rule. Export and import security-related requirements have become more prevalent in the past decade. Since the Incoterms reflect common global business practice, the new rules include security-related requirements in Articles 4 and 7, along with security-related cost in Article 9. Research showed that the vast majority of problems between the seller and the buyer in regards to trade terms resulted from choosing the wrong Incoterms rule for their sales contract. The 2020 version of the Incoterms therefore focused on changing the presentation and content of the rules to assist users with selecting the most appropriate Incoterms rule for their sales contract. That concludes this supply chain spotlight on what is new in Incoterms 2020. Thank you very much for your time and interest.